What's going on, guys? Welcome to the Fantasy Addiction Network. We're going to be doing a show today that I like to call the Weekly Fix. This will be the first iteration of a weekly fantasy show where I basically just rant and talk about everything that's going on in the XFL, and we may even dip into the NFL a little bit. That'll basically be our bread and butter for most of the season, or most of the year, that is. But right now, I've been really excited about the XFL. I've been posting a lot of content for those of you that have been following me. Thank you so much for the love and support. Do really appreciate it. That definitely helps keep me going. But really just noticed that there weren't a lot of people talking about it, and I think this last weekend showed that the XFL is viable. I think that there's definitely a market for a spring football league. Now, I know there are other gridiron football leagues out there, but I think the XFL fills a void that is really necessary right now. And I hope that this becomes like a standalone league. It doesn't need to be something that's just a feeder league to the NFL, but even if it becomes that, I would still say that overall is a success. Now, that would make it a little bit harder from like a fantasy angle, because what we really want is players that are going to be, consistent year over year, players that you remember their name next year when fantasy season rolls around and you're like, oh, I remember I had that guy in my team. So, I mean, having consistency, I think, will be important from a fan perspective. But, I mean, I also want what is best for the players. So, hopefully, the XFL can continue to grow, keep those salaries competitive, so that way it can be something that ends up benefiting the players. So, but really, kind of what I just want to go through is just there's a lot of, different pieces of news that have come out over the course of the week, just in response to everything that's happened with week one, and just trying to give us some data contextualized. Now, week one was really important, just for the league itself, but from a analysis standpoint and truly trying to figure out what these teams actually are, who they're actually going to be. What will be really important now is week two, because week two is going to give us more context to what we saw in week one. There were definitely some things that I think will end up looking like flukes by the end of the season, and there's some stuff that we should have honed in on right away. So week two is just going to help us further drill down and magnify, shortcomings or strengths from different teams. So, and I really like the way that the schedule has already lined up. When you look at two really strong teams that showed up, you had the DC Defenders looked great on Saturday, and then the New York Guardians defense looked lights out playing against the Vipers. Then they get to play each other. Whereas the Dragons and Vipers both lost their first game, but now they get to play each other and show who's actually, going to rise to the top there and, make it back into contention here. Then you also have two underperforming teams in the LA Wildcats and the Dallas Renegades. We get to see who ends up coming back there. Plus, it's looking like we can hopefully, count on being able to see Landry Jones and Josh Johnson this week. So that should end up giving us a lot more data. And then you have the two, I would say, the biggest surprise teams in the Houston Roughnecks and the St. Louis Battlehawks. So I don't think the schedule turned out perfectly in terms of being able to help us analyze and figure out what's actually happening in the XFL, giving us a lot of meat to chew on for fantasy purposes. But part of the reason why I do this for you guys is like I said, there isn't really many people giving fantasy analysis on the XFL right now. But as of last week, I feel like there's a ton of potential for this league. Daily is big. There's definitely a lack of a true corporate level season long platform, but a lot of you are playing either like in home leagues using Google spreadsheets or Excel docs, or there's a lot of people that are playing over on altfantasysports.com, and there's really just a lack of information out there for people that are trying to keep up. So if you want to continue following the league and actually enjoy watching the XFL, I felt like there was a need there for people that wanted to do that, and that's kind of what we've been filling. So if you guys have any suggestions or comments or things that you think are still missing that you'd like to see, I would definitely be more than open to hear that. So make sure to hit me up in the comment section, or you can reach out to me on any of my social medias. The links will be in the description after I post this video up. So, I mean, let me know what you think is still out there that's missing I do have a website up right now that has all the basics that you need to be able to get through a fantasy season. We have rankings on our webpage. We have start-sit decisions based on the team. You can go here and see who I'd start, who I'd sit. Got some videos on there as well. Basically, things coming from our YouTube channel as well. Also have like waiver wire report. You can see the different guys that I would target on the waivers. I'll be updating this weekly for you guys. I also have trade tools on there. We have our buy low, sell high report. We have different trade tiers. Even have a trade calculator. I did a video on that for you guys. Download it and help you make sure that, especially at this point in the league, when values are shifting rapidly, you can still at least kind of maintain an edge in terms of what's happening across the XFL, because I'm digging into the data a lot more heavily than you'll be able to do by just watching part of the game on Saturday or Sunday. So just trying to stay up to date with everything that's going on across the XFL is going to really help. Personally, I think football is a lot more fun when you have some fantasy element to it, which is why I've really been pushing this, because I really want to see this league succeed, and I think that fantasy football is a great way to help this league succeed. So again, if you guys have any thoughts or questions or recommendations, things that you'd be like, hey, I'd really appreciate if this tool existed and it's just not there, let me know. Be more than happy to hear that. But let's go through some of the news that's come out over the past couple days. So we had this article here over at the Action Network, which is definitely more of a betting site. Got Sean Corner and Matthew Friedman over there, Chris Raybon. Basically just going through a few things here, and definitely hit on something that is a pretty important topic for those of you that are in states where you can actually bet on the games themselves. With the exception of the Roughnecks and the Wildcats, all of the unders hit, and some of them hit pretty excessively. As he kind of breaks down here, they were expecting to see about 75 offensive plays per team based on scrimmages and just observations of the rules. But what we saw was, with the exception of the Wildcats, Vipers, and the Battlehawks, everyone hit under that. So there were less plays than they were expecting, and there was actually a lower conversion rate in the red zone than was expected, or than is seen in the NFL. So although this was kind of booked to be a more offensive league, a lot of the rules that they constructed in the XFL were based around making offense a bit more potent and making giving teams the ability to score more points, because the XFL wanted to make sure that fan element was there, and a lot of people prefer high-scoring games versus low-scoring defensive games, not like 80 to 70 type games, but where there's a lot of points being scored. That typically tends to get your higher ratings in terms of, like, when you think of Super Bowls, would you rather have watched the Patriots-Eagles Super Bowl or the Patriots-Rams Super Bowl? Some people might say the Patriots-Rams, but personally, I thought the Eagles one, and like the Chiefs 49ers, was a lot better as well. So the XFL is definitely trying to make this more of a scoring-centric league, and I think that we'll begin to see that as the league goes on, because we have some of these offenses right now that they're not tight-knit yet. I mean, these guys only had a couple weeks in training camp to try to learn the new rules and come together and play, so they've only been together for a short period of time, and it takes a while to build some chemistry. So I would venture to guess that as the season goes on, we will continue to see more and more scoring, just better offense overall and better quality from the offenses. But right now, again, if you're in the betting market, it's probably a good idea to continue to hit the under on a lot of these games until we start seeing a trend continue with the offense getting better. It might take a few weeks, might take until about the midpoint in the season for some of these offenses to truly find their personality and their rhythm and their flow. So Sean Corner also noted that it would be critical to not overreact to week one results heading into week two. Finding the balance between the two will be vital in unlocking success. I mean, that's pretty much what we see in the NFL too, guys. Like whenever week one happens in the NFL, we always overreact. There's things that, oh gosh, this is gonna be how it's gonna be for the entire season. Like there's things that we need to take away from week one, but we always want to make sure that we're just reacting and not overreacting because things will change by week two. So my biggest thing right now is like a lot of people are throwing the Dallas Renegades away. I think the Dallas Renegades are still one of the strongest teams in the XFL. They had a backup quarterback that couldn't throw the ball more than 10 yards down the field without looking like he was struggling to get the ball out of his hands. And even though he was accurate, close up, like throwing it close to the line, that's not what the Dallas Renegades air raid offense is supposed to do. They're supposed to be able to go deep and hit them 20, 30 yards down the field. So you saw like players like Jeff Badette and Jazz Ferguson barely get any volume in this last game. Well, once Landry Jones comes back and they get to play the LA Wildcats this week, who don't have nearly as strong of a secondary as the St. Louis Battlehawks do, we could see a completely different team. So that's the kind of stuff that you don't want to overreact on in week one because, for one, it's a new league. Like I said, there's a lot of chemistry that isn't quite there yet between the different players. And then, really, you just want to make sure you always stay water because, like, in fantasy, NFL, XFL, it's all going to be the same. Things change from week to week basis. You might be right on a take in week one, and then you're wrong by week 4, and then you're right again by week 8. That's just how things go. So you have to be willing to go with the ebbs and flows of the different changes that are going around the league and try to anticipate changes before they come, but also react as things happen that we weren't expecting. So definitely agree with Sean Corner here. And you guys can read these articles as well for yourself. I'm just kind of trying to highlight them. He also highlighted that the Tampa Bay Vipers looked worse than expected, which, I mean, a lot of people expected the Tampa Bay Vipers to be one of the top competing teams. They had a 7.5 win total when the win totals were first released, which I still think was kind of ridiculous. And as you can see, I was pushing for the under, as was Sean here, just because it's really hard to win 8 out of 10 games in a new league, even if the Vipers were really good. And I think they still are better than they're being perceived right now, and that's kind of what he's getting at here. Is there's a lot of people that are going to overreact to how poorly the Vipers performed. But again, this was the first game in a new league with new rules, new offensive chemistries, not quite meshing. I think if the Tampa Bay Vipers, if either Aaron Murray gets it going, but I think they'll end up finding more success if they go with a guy like Quentin Flowers as their quarterback. I think that would unlock a lot of success for their team and look for them to still have a strong second half of the season. So this might be a good time for the perception of the Vipers to be lower. You might be able to start taking advantage of that in fantasy and in the betting market. So I see here, I would like to know who got the most slot snaps in total. That's a very good idea. I know they have some raw data statistics over at the XFL's main site. I'm not sure that they actually have it charted based on the position that people lined up on, but that's definitely something that we could go through and look at, in the film room. Now, when you say that, you're just wondering like who lined up as the X, the Y, and the Z on each play, or what specifically are you looking for there? If you don't mind responding back, that would be helpful. Anyway, let's continue on. So I think I beat this article to death. We also had an article on the XFL's main website of a PFF report card. So Pro Football Focus actually did some analysis over the XFL and gave player grades, which is really awesome to see that PFF is helping out with the XFL, taking over from where they've done a lot of good work to make data analytics in the NFL be, in a lot better place than where it was just a few years ago. So we looked here, they broke down the top quarterback passing grades, and unsurprisingly, Cardale Jones was actually the highest rated quarterback in the XFL with a 92.2 rating. I believe I saw somewhere else that the adjusted completion percentage was 87.5%. I think that's when they take out like plays where the quarterback willingly threw the ball away because he was about to be sacked. So really high performance here from Cardale Jones. As I've been highlighting, I think Jordan Ta'amu is the real deal. and I would not be surprised if he ended up, getting onto an NFL squad after this XFL season is over. Matt McGloin being above Philip Walker here was a little bit surprising. Obviously, you have to take these grades with a grain of salt because they look at a lot of different metrics that don't necessarily always correlate to positive things happening on the field. So, like Philip Nelson here was graded higher than Philip Walker, but no one is going to argue that Philip Nelson had a better game than Philip Walker. Philip Walker just had a few more errant throws, and a lot of those, unfortunately, were Sammy Cooks. But overall, like really, really pleased with a lot of the quarterback performances across the league. And I think if Josh Johnson and Landry Jones come back this week, we could see a even more exciting week 2 than we had in week 1. Very excited about that. Overall, St. Louis Battlehawks were definitely one of the higher graded offensive teams, and that really had to do with their run game. They were really the only team in the XFL that was able to manage to get a run game going. A lot of that had to do with Jordan Teamu getting a lot of rushing yards, but Matt Jones there as well. Houston Roughnecks obviously had a high-graded offense because they just couldn't stop scoring points. DC Defenders ranked right there with them. So, we're starting to see a trend and a pattern here of who are going to be the better offensive teams, but with only one data point right now, again, let's just remember to not overreact. I'm actually going to skip down here. I wanted to go to some of these team notes. I found a couple of these pretty interesting here. This is definitely something to note as well for fantasy purposes. Dallas's offensive line, the XFL, they led the XFL with 2.4 yards before contact per rush attempt. Now, that's really good if your running back isn't even getting hit until they're already beyond 2 yards from the line of scrimmage. So that's definitely one of the reasons why we're not giving up on Cameron Artis-Payne just yet. But also got to keep an eye out for Lance Dunbar because he looked really good on Sunday. And once they get Landry Jones back, that should open things up for their run game as well because teams won't be able to sell out and just commit to stopping them short because Landry Jones has the potential to actually hit them deep. See what else we had here. Cardale Jones, like I said, led the XFL minimum 10 attempts and adjusted completion percentage with 87.5%. So really accurate, very high performance for Cardale Jones there in the season opener. We'll see how he fares this week playing against the New York Guardians, who have one of the better defenses in the league. So that's going to be a bit telling. If the defenders roll this week, then I think that it's pretty clear that they're going to be a dominant force in this league. But we could see them get trounced by the New York Guardians. But I think if this game is close, it just confirms what we were already thinking, that both of these teams are going to be top tier in the league. And if one team trounces another, then it's going to be, okay, week 1, maybe that was the mistake. So really like how the schedule shaped out to kind of help give us these data points going into the rest of the season. Jarrell Presley forced the second most missed tackles. Now, this is something really to pay attention to if you guys are in season-long leagues. I think Jarrell Presley is the number one target that I would go after in terms of buying low with the amount of running back busts that we saw and just overall lack of performance across the XFL for running backs. You know that's not going to last. Eventually, some running backs are going to start breaking through, and I would bet heavily on Jarrell Presley being that main guy to break through. He looked really good when he was able to get in space. He was getting hit behind the line of scrimmage a bit, so maybe that says something negatively about the defender's offensive line. But being able to force 5 missed tackles is something to note. And as the season goes on, he gets a little bit more comfortable with this offensive line and this team. I would venture to guess that Jarrell Presley will end up being the leading running back for fantasy by the time the season ends. So if you're playing in a season-long league and you don't have him, try to trade for him now before it gets too late. All right, Carly led the XFL tight ends in yards per route run. He only had 1 target, so that only means so much. Eli Rogers looked really good. No surprise there. Sam Mobley finished with most yards per route run, minimum 10 routes this week, but wasn't nearly used as much like Cam Phillips, one of 2 receivers to make multiple contested catches. So Cam Phillips received 9 targets and also had multiple contested catches. Hopefully, Sammy Coates was watching him because he could learn a thing or two about the contested catches. I'm dissing on Sammy Coates because I still believe in him. I just want him to do better. So I've learned that when I talk negatively about players, they end up outperforming me just to shut me up. So that's the tactic that I'm employing with Sammy Coates right now, just based on my heavy Sammy Coates ownership across all of my fantasy leagues. Elijah Hood forced the second most missed tackles, also forced 5, just like Jarrell Presley. I think that Elijah Hood we didn't really get a full picture of what this team is going to look like in week 1, playing with Chad Kanoff and just seeing him completely break down as the game went on. I think that Elijah Hood is a definite buy low right now, so another name to keep up there. Nelson Spruce, I guess he's going to be the Antonio Brown of this league. Well, at least Antonio Brown before he went crazy. 15 targets, and that was without Josh Johnson. So I'm really excited for all the leagues that I have Nelson Spruce, and really sad for the ones that I don't. Matt McGloin led the league with an average depth of target of 12.5 yards, which is good. He just missed on a lot of those deep throws, so hopefully he can work on his deep accuracy as the league goes on. Darius Victor was a surprise this weekend, leading the XFL running backs in yards per route run. He's not a pass-catching running back, and they use him like one, but it doesn't really matter from a fantasy perspective what he's supposed to be. If that's what he actually is, then we need to make sure we pay attention to that. Jamar Summers already making a play for defensive MVP, playing the second most covered snaps for a cornerback without giving up a first down. We'll see how much of that just has to do with the Vipers' offense, but the Guardians' defense looks legit, guys, and I think that they could end up being one of the top competitors in this league just based on that defense alone. Colby Pearson led the XFL in average depth of target with a 26.8-yard average. Only had 4 targets, and then 2 of them were really deep. One going overthrew, and the other one he dropped. So it doesn't surprise me that he had a large average depth of target. This team would be really dangerous if they had all of their receivers that they had drafted. D'Angelo Yancey and Tanner Gentry on IR right now. Hopefully they get back soon. DeMornay Pearson now finished with the most yards after catch this week. He looked great. He had that one plus 40-yard catch and run. When he got the ball in space, he was really fast and elusive. And then LaDainian Washington, who kind of getting slept on right now because he didn't score nearly as many fantasy points as DeMornay Pearson or Alonzo Russell, played the most snaps without a negatively graded play. I think that says something overall. I think this will just be a 1A, 1B, 1C situation in St. Louis. Definitely keep an eye out, to see how that situation develops. Seattle did a really good job of pressuring the quarterback against the defenders. They pressured him on almost half of his dropbacks, which is the second best defensive number in the XFL. And they were really good at stuffing the run behind the line of scrimmage. So, again, kind of trying to dig through our data points here. Was that just a poor performance on DC's offensive line, or is that a vote in favor of the Seattle Dragons having one of the better D-lines? I think their D-line looked really good, and I think overall the Dragons are a little bit undervalued in terms of their defensive potential, but again, we'll have more data as of at the end of week 2. Devian Smith, another name you want to look at for fantasy purposes if people are still sleeping on him. Most yards after contact, 68 yards after contact as a rusher this week. Definitely more of that power back, but the Vipers showed some promise in terms of their offense. They just need to score once they get to the red zone. They were there 4 times and only came away with 3 points. But again, I think that speaks more to the Guardians' defense. Danny Williams finished with the second most yards per route run. Just absolutely dominated when he got the ball. He looked really good out there, so definitely another name to keep in mind there. I found this article on XFL News Hub. Really liked. There was a couple of different things that they broke down here. I won't go through all of it, but one of the main things that they highlighted was Winston Moss's lack of command of being able to keep the locker room in LA under control. As most of you know, or if you don't know, and this is the first time you're hearing about it, after the poor performance against the Houston Roughnecks on Saturday. They've already fired their defensive coordinator, and I mean, you typically don't see that at least until halfway through the season in the NFL. So 1 week in and they're already firing people. This is definitely a unfortunate situation for Los Angeles fans. A lot of analysts across the internet actually had LA as one of their top 3 teams based on just the average, based on the skill of this lineup or of this roster. And I didn't really believe in them from the start. I do think that they have the potential to be good, as does every team in the XFL right now, because there's a lot of parity right now. But I do think that this is a sign that we need to monitor. And if this isn't kept in check, this could quickly become very similar to what we saw the Atlanta Legends look like in the AAF, which basically was the laughing stock of a league, in which case that's really not good when you're already talking about a secondary football league in which the talent level is already below that of what the general public is expecting. So hopefully they can get it together and that Oliver Luck doesn't have to step in. It's going to be an interesting dynamic considering the league owns all of the teams, and if they want to take a step in and make sure that nothing else continues to happen here in LA, it's going to end up falling on the commissioner, not on an individual team owner, because there aren't any individual team owners here. So that's was all I had to say about that there. And then apparently there was a conversation between Oliver Luck and his son Andrew Luck about Philip Walker, because Philip Walker had actually played with Andrew Luck through training camp a year or so back, in which Andrew Luck was really impressed by Philip Walker and told Oliver Luck, like, hey, like when you're putting together your rosters, if this guy isn't on an NFL team, you need to go after him. I think he'd be a great fit. Well, thank you, Andrew, because you gave us a great gift by getting Philip Walker onto the Houston Roughnecks, because that was really fun to watch. And I think the Houston Roughnecks offense is really what people were hoping and expecting to see in the XFL. And if more teams can emulate what he's doing, I think that is going to overall be a really good thing for this league. But I thought that was interesting as well. Don't really care about that. One other thing that I thought was pretty interesting. So we've already seen Antonio Brown lash out against the XFL and say that the league was going to fold and that he was going to buy it. With what money, I don't know. With everything that he's been doing and the amount of legal trouble that he's been getting into, I'm not sure that he has any money left, but that's for a different day. So now we have another, I don't want to disparage him too much, but just someone that basically squandered a lot of his talent based on his character off the field. Johnny Manziel is now throwing shade at the XFL, in which he said that he's not going to play for another league that's going to fold midway through the season, which I know he played for, I believe, the Memphis Express last year in the AAF, and he looked terrible. So maybe part of the reason the league folded is because of poor quarterback play, in which you didn't contribute to that. But overall, it doesn't really matter too much what Johnny Manziel says. I think the XFL has every bit of potential to succeed. The ticket sales are already doing much better than what we saw in the AAF, and there's a lot of good things that are going on in the XFL right now. I definitely think that they can succeed. So who really cares what Johnny Manziel is saying? I wanted to jump over to the NFL. There was a fun little news article that I saw come through, and Jameis Winston apparently finally had LASIK done today. Now, after throwing 30 interceptions, I wonder at what point he realized that he didn't have the ability to see deep down the field. I can't remember, it was like week 15 or week 16, there was a news blurb that had come out that he would practice with goggles on because he couldn't actually see the scoreboard or deep down the field, and like players would have to tell him what the scoreboard said because he couldn't see that far away. I'm like, you've been playing in the NFL at a high level for like multiple years, and you haven't gotten anything to correct your vision. maybe we'll see that Jameis Winston is going to be the best quarterback ever now that he can actually see which receiver is his down the field. But hopefully, so I won't stick on the NFL too long because I know most people are here for the XFL. But I just thought that was really interesting that it took him this long to finally decide to go get that done. But it sounds like everything went well. Wish the best for the guy. Hopefully he gets another chance there in Tampa Bay. All right, let's go over. Oh yeah, so this was a fun bit of news that came out. So Seattle, they definitely had a bit of a wide receiver lack outside of Austin Proehl on Saturday. Kaysen Williams has been hurt. Looks like he's going to miss another week. Keenan Reynolds looked average. Dunce's Bird looked all right. Alonzo Moore, dropped a pretty much, well, it wasn't really wide open, but he could have had a really big deep ball and didn't come down with it. So overall, the Seattle Dragons wide receiver core left a lot to be desired. So they actually went out and targeted a Canadian football player by the name of S.J. Green. Now, I'm not too familiar with Canadian football myself. I haven't really watched it too much, but he's 34 years old, so definitely up there in age, but has a total of 716 receptions and 10,000 yards, 60 touchdowns across his 12-year career. So from what I hear, I think a lot of people are pretty excited to see what he can do in the XFL. If you're looking at this from a fantasy perspective, I would definitely wait a few weeks before I'd start him. But if you have a spot on your bench, you can definitely throw him there. And if you want to just wait around and see what they end up doing with him in Seattle, then he might end up becoming a nice daily play towards the end of the season if he ends up becoming their main red zone target. And then we also got the news that the XFL is reportedly going to be playing their championship game in Houston now. Obviously, they have to play it somewhere, but I think that'll be a really interesting element, especially if Houston can end up continuing the success that they had to start the year, or because they're definitely one of the favorites now to actually play. It would be a little interesting to see what ends up happening. Now, in the NFL, when you have 32 teams, the odds of a team actually making it to the Super Bowl and getting a home field advantage is really low. It's never happened. But in the XFL, with the 8 teams to choose from, the odds are much greater that a team is going to end up being in the championship game and playing with home field advantage. So I do think that's a little interesting that they chose to try to find a neutral site that could very well end up just being a home field advantage for a team, whether or not they actually deserved it based on their record or performance throughout the season. So could be very interesting there overall. But that's pretty much all the news that's come out. So I've kind of hit on a lot of stuff here. Go back to your comment there, NFL DFS playback. I'd like to know who got the most snaps in total. Oh, were you working on this? I'm sorry if I misread that. So maybe elaborate a little bit more on what you were working on. Maybe there's something that we can look at together and see if there's anything that we can collab on. Because right now I think there's definitely some stats out there for the XFL, but it's much murkier in terms of being able to utilize it for analytics for the XFL. So it'd be very interesting to see what the XFL continues to unveil as the season goes on, and hopefully into future seasons as the league continues to see success. And I really do hope that this league sees a lot of success. But anyway, that's pretty much all I had for you guys. So again, like I said in the beginning of the video, please hit me up in the comment section if you watch this later and let me know. Right now, I feel like there's a lack of fantasy and XFL content out there, which is kind of why I've done this channel in the first place, is just to help fill that void, because I want to see this league succeed, first of all, and second of all, fantasy is just fun. And I think that combining fantasy with the XFL is going to be the ticket to actually let them become the successful league that they need to be. But if there's anything that you guys are like, this is sorely missing in the XFL right now, I really wish there was this, other than a corporate-sized fantasy season-long platform, I unfortunately can't provide that for you guys right now. But I do believe that that will be something that comes along in the future if this league succeeds and goes into the second year, which I think at this point, it's not a foregone conclusion by any means, but I do think it's a pretty strong chance that the XFL will succeed and at least make it through this year and hopefully continue on for many years to come. So hit me up in that comment section. Let me know if there's anything that you guys are looking for, anything from like a stat perspective or from an advice perspective. What would be very helpful for you guys, and what would make you enjoy this league even more? So let me know. Check out my website, fantasyaddictionnetwork.com. Got right now I already have start sit advice, rankings, waiver wire advice, trade advice, pretty much anything you need to run your season-long league. And I'll be adding some daily stuff there as well for those of you that play DraftKings and FanDuel. Did pretty well this last week, but DraftKings and FanDuel have already done a really good job of adjusting quickly. In the NFL, they take a little bit longer to adjust to different trends, but in the XFL, they adjusted very quickly to the risers and fallers. So it's going to be a little bit harder to figure out the Rubik's Cube of the slate this weekend, but I think we'll still be able to nail down some values, especially based on what we talked about at the beginning of this video and looking at players that are being overreacted to negatively. So like you see like Jazz Ferguson, I think it's like $5,100 on DraftKings this week, so he's going to be highly featured in a lot of my lineups because I think Landry Jones is going to be able to utilize him a lot better than Philip Nelson was able to, and things like that are going to help us end up unlocking the key to getting that slate correct. But anyway, thank you guys so much for joining me today, and if you watch this video again, thank you so much for listening up to this point. I do truly appreciate all the love and support I've received. I feel like there's a pretty strong community of people that want to see the XFL succeed, and a lot of people that are excited about the potential from a fantasy perspective of what this league has provided already and what it will continue to provide as it grows. So thank you guys for helping me grow that, and I do really just appreciate every single one of you watching, but thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in the next video.